In this example from Season 1, Carp...
Okay. This this example is not a good one. This example is not a good one. Hey guys, hope you're having a wonderful day. I'm back. I know that it's been a while since my last video, but I've been on a break, and honestly, it was really good. I needed it. We're going back into Stage 4 of the Overwatch League here pretty quickly, so I'll be starting that up next week, but I've got some extra time, so I thought I'd be making some more videos because I missed you guys, and honestly, making videos, especially about Overwatch, is just really fun. So anyway, today a video that caught my attention was one that came out of Akshon Esports, and it was a video called How to Make Space. Or what was it actually called? What is Making Space? That's what it was called. It was called What is Making Space? And this is a very, very common topic or question that is asked quite frequently, especially from tank players. You know, space is something that can be impacted by all types of players, from DPS to flankers to supports. So I was like, hey, cool, let's see what Akshon Esports thought about space and what is space, and see their definition, and hopefully the community can have a kind of discrete explanation and really kind of a good understanding about what is the concept of space in Overwatch, how you make it, how you take it, and all that. And well, unfortunately, I was kind of disappointed at the explanation. So it's not bad, but I feel like there were a lot of pieces that Akshon Esports didn't quite link together, so I wanted to watch the video, react to it, and hopefully share my opinions, further your understanding of the matter. And yeah, I hope that kind of the discussion between what people think space is and what space actually is will be something that you might find interesting. So let's get to watching. Got my handy dandy phone here. Let's see what you have to say.
If you watch a lot of Overwatch content,
I do watch a lot of Overwatch content.
Viewer of the Overwatch League.
No,
You've
Overwatch League?
Heard
What's that?
Throw around the term "making space" a lot. It sounds like a pretty simple concept, but it's more complex than you might
space
think.
is deceptively
So
a
what does
difficult
making
concept.
space really mean? While commonly used to describe the play patterns of tank players applying pressure, there is a bit more to it than just diving in with primal rage. In today's video, we will explore the idea of making space for your team and arm you with the knowledge to effectively apply it to your own games. In broad terms,
I do love the
making
production quality of
space
Akshon
is any
Esports.
action that aims to establish or grow the area that your team can play in with relative safety. By marching forward
That's a
with
good
his shield,
generic description.
Reinhardt can create space incrementally as he advances, allowing the rest of the team to follow.
That's not quite true. So, like, so this statement right here, it's where Reinhardt moving forward will incrementally take space. Yes. However, especially when you start getting into talking about high grounds and things like that, Reinhardt is great at taking space on singular angles because you can't shoot past his shield without breaking it, but you can go around it or above it. So Reinhardt can't just mindlessly move forward because he can only protect from a singular angle. So Reinhardt, he will take new space, but he will also give up space that he previously controlled or previously took. And I assume it's going to be the exact same thing for Winston as well.
You are trying to create space by occupying the enemy's attention, thereby allowing your allies to get into position without the threat of being focused down. Although
So this concept of attention, like space being linked to attention, is a good one, but it's being misused here, or at least misunderstood. And when you think of attention, the most common phrase that you often hear parroted by people who are at least involved with higher ranked Overwatch is that attention is a resource. But space is also a resource. And I'll give you a couple seconds. What else can be considered a resource? So attention is a resource, space is a resource, health is a resource, ultimate charge is a resource, cooldowns are resources. So when you're talking about these things like attention, it's not a specific concept that allows you to take space, it's a resource. And you have to, in a game of Overwatch, it's this balance of which resources you pay or which resources you give up in to gain more valuable resources somewhere else. So if you can command the attention of the opponent that was previously put towards controlling space, and instead you force them to focus on you, either because you're a flanker or you're a Winston who dove something, that person has to focus their attention not just on controlling the area they were in, but on staying alive. So when we're talking about concepts like flanking, like attention, like cooldowns, which I don't think cooldowns are actually mentioned in this video explicitly. These are all resources, of which space is a resource. It's just a harder one to define and imagine and picture because cooldowns, for example, have a number. Your health has a number, ultimate charge. Those are all numbers that you can actually find directly on the HUD. But space is a less quantitative resource. You can very easily define it if you're looking at like a bird's eye view of a map or something like that with diagrams and squiggly lines, but presented to you on an Overwatch HUD, not so much, which makes it a lot harder for people to understand because very few people have actually watched their own footage in third person.
Usually done by tanks, you can create space with any hero, whether it's zoning enemies out of an area with threatening abilities,
This is good.
or having a constant stream of fire directed at a choke point. Essentially, making space is the act of expanding your team's territory so that you can get into position without having to worry about getting killed. Keeping in mind that all heroes have the ability to do this, let's talk about 4 core ways in which making space can be achieved.
So this is where I really kind of like fall off the wagon with this video, in that when you talk about space, it's not just what is space. It's like a resource. For example, you know what a cooldown is. A cooldown limits the amount of times in which you can actually use one of your abilities that you have. However, space isn't just one thing. You don't just like take it and then you have it. Like there's 2 people, there's opponents. There's a team of 6 people versus another team of 6 people, and space is a resource that is being fought over. So the opponent is obviously going to be doing things to try and prevent you. You can't just like the Reinhardt example, you can't just move forward. The opponent is going to be trying to stop you from taking that space. So what happens here is there's basically 3 concepts. You're going to want to make the space, then you're going to want to take the space, and then you're going to hold the space. So when you're talking about space as a concept, you need to view it as one of these 3 different things. 3 things. Make, take, and hold. So you, regardless of which character you play in Overwatch, you're going to be doing one of those 3 things. So when they're talking about ultimates like High Noon or like a large amount of Bastion fire, suppressing fire, or double projectile spam, which is very popular in Platinum with Pharah and Junkrat, these are making space because you make it untenable for an opponent to occupy the area at which you are applying your damage or your resources to. If you have invested a large amount of resources into this area, Bastion can't shoot everywhere at once, Junkrat can't spam everywhere at once. Your team is investing resources in order to make that space untenable for the opponents to hold. Once that space is made, it doesn't mean that you can take it. It is very, very possible for space to be inhospitable, or for holding an area of the map to be inhospitable to both teams. So space can be made, but then you have to determine what space you actually need to take. So you don't actually need to make space in order to take it. If you want to do a hard engagement onto an opponent, that's taking the space through force. So you can force them in a series of trades, like this is where the term of soft diving comes in, is, as you'll see later in this video, a dive composition dives a bunker composition. Now, a dive composition cannot force, that's a lie. A dive composition can force a bunker composition to change their location, which is going to be making the space that they were previously in available for the divers to use to stage. And this is usually done through rotations. This is why when you're talking about high-level gameplay and why you see pro teams rotating, either staging or rotating, this is all about manipulating space. So we'll get into that in a little bit more, but when it comes to holding space, that's how you withstand resources that are being used against you to try and either kill you or force you to give up the space. Basically, all trades will either want to be for the purpose of distinctly engaging, explicitly engaging for the purpose of eliminations, or for trying to gain some sort of favorable trade in resources. Now, if it doesn't matter if like full proper engage actually happens, people can stabilize and back off. And this is where you do kind of hear stabilization or anything like that coming in that if a team loses in this trade, then stabilizing is for allowing them to get the resources that are required, cooldowns, health pools, so that they can re-engage and try and take another fight where they're going to expend what the resources they collected over a period of time in order to try and retake the space or just win the fight that they had lost just previously. Let's keep watching.
1. Taking aggro.
Taking aggro.
These heroes are ones that most people will think about when talking about making space. As traditionally done in almost every video game, the tanks are equipped with kits that allow them to sponge or avoid damage without dying or being
Sponge
a
is a
detriment to their
different
team. Reinhardt's
technical
large
term.
2000 HP barrier
You shouldn't
gives
use
your team
sponge in
a
that
lot
context.
of time to push from place to place until you can fight from a more favorable position. Winston is built to demand the enemy's attention, buy his team time, and then get away safely. Wrecking Ball has a similar role, getting in.
So this is another thing where I agree with the categorization of, like, Winston and Hammond work similar, but not the same. And then Reinhardt here as an inclusion is also a little bit strange. So Reinhardt is really good at, like, he can take space across a single linear path. He can also hold space really, really well because he's got that shield. So if an opponent is trying to make space, Reinhardt can withstand quite a lot of resources being put into him. He can withstand 2,000 resources worth of attention. And not only can he prevent that damage from being applied to his personal health pool, but other people can use him for cover. Shield tank, like Reinhardt, can do that. These more mobile tanks, like Hammond and Winston, they control space by trying to diminish the opponent's resources, including attention, including cooldowns, or else Hammond and Winston are just going to kill squishies like just completely alone. You have to pay attention to them, and that causes less attention to be focused on your front line. But if you play a composition that works with Reinhardt, and then you just completely sub out the Reinhardt for a Reinhardt, you know, the rest of your team is relying on that space being held so they can be in a much more aggressive position while getting value without their resources being bled away by the opponent's efforts. So categorizing all three of these tanks as tanks that are responsible for taking aggro, like what really is aggro? Is aggro attention? Because if that case, Reinhardt's not manipulating attention, not to the same extent in which Winston and Hammond are.
In and out and making as much trouble as he can without fear of death. In this clip from last year's Overwatch
Here we go.
World
This
Cup,
is where we're going to talk
China's
about
main
resources
tank
as it comes to
Gushui
cooldowns.
puts on an absolute clinic against the Canadians.
And there's one very,
Canada is
very
successful
important part of
throughout
this
most of their
video
point A
that I was
defense,
so disappointed was not
denying
mentioned.
China's dive with Agility's Junkrat dishing out
Yes,
massive
dive,
damage,
blah, blah, blah. Nobody
and
cares about this.
XQC halting tanks to the low ground, preventing
There's
them from
one
honing in
clip.
on a single target. Gushui initiates a dive.
Yeah, at 2 minutes and 52 seconds here, you see Gushui diving in here. But the thing with Gushui is that he is using a cooldown. That is a resource that he has. Attention has not been manipulated here. He hasn't drawn aggro. He has used a resource in order to initiate this fight. The end result of this fight is going to be one of two things. This is a hard fight, so we're not fighting for resources. This is not a soft. It's a hard. He's diving right onto them. So he has two options either. Somebody is going to die and the fight is going to resolve, or one of the teams is going to back off and stabilize, and then whatever battle line is drawn while both teams gain their cooldowns, then that will start the next fight, whether there's going to be soft engages, people juggling for position, for map control, and then eventually there will be another hard engage. So the thing here is that China is trying to use their resources in order to take this fight, but Note is going to counter that with a cooldown of his own. He's not just going to let this happen. Note boosts forward and tries to prevent and interrupt Gushui's dive. So this is where cooldowns come into play. Cooldowns are traded for cooldowns. And if cooldowns are used first, cooldowns that are used second are more powerful because you have more options. Whoever uses their cooldown first has fewer options, whereas the opponent who sees somebody using a cooldown on them has the option of either using their cooldowns to react to that or using their cooldowns to react to something else. So this is part of where you can't just take space. It has to be a trade of resources, and resources can be just as simple as cooldowns.
Agility's Junkrat dishing out massive damage, and XQC halting tanks to the low ground, preventing them from honing in on a single target. Gushui initiates a dive.
And if you want to talk about a much more general, broad level topic of what it means to kind of control space, is that you want to be able to use non-cooldown resources or renewable resources like walking around, like crouching, like shooting people, reloading. Technically Technically, your primary fire is not a completely renewable resource in the same way that looking around, moving, jumping, and crouching are, because reload is kind of like the opposite of cooldown. It's kind of like a cooldown is where you do something once and then you have a long wait period. Primary fire is like you're shooting, and then at some point you're like, can't do that anymore, just for a moment, keep going. So you can think of it as like moving is completely renewable, and then primary fires or abilities with very, very high uptimes you can use those much more frequently, and you want to use resources that you have that are renewable in order to force non-renewable resources out of the opponent. This means that you want movement and shooting to force out cooldowns of the opponent, so you can react to their cooldowns with cooldowns of your own. And if you use your cooldowns, that should force the opponent to use their ultimates to counter your cooldowns. And when they use your ultimates, you can use your ultimates to finish them off. And ultimates are the ultimate resource that you have in a fight. And if you commit to them and they can't be countered, you should win, unless you mess up. So taking space, when we talk about this concept of taking space, ultimately, it is using renewable resources, movement, and cooldowns in order to give yourself an advantage in a fight.
Taking aggro and drawing Canada's
That
attention.
specific advantage being
This allows
positioning.
Leave's Doomfist to get the kill confirm on agilities. However,
This
before
part-
China
this-
can
this-
capitalize
this
on
explanation
the man
here isn't
advantage,
really relevant
Canada's
to
tanks
space.
collapse together and form a blockade, allowing Bani to get the res. In the very next push, China uses Sound Barrier for sustain, and Gushui uses Primal Rage, knocking Canada around and completely obliterating their bunker. But not through kills. China was able to break Canada's positioning through crowd control alone. Gushui is able to create chaos, draw aggro, and separate the members of Team Canada. Crimzo is essentially forced into a 1v1 against Leave and falls first, along with his Transcendence. Additionally, Gushui knocks agilities
This is
and
if they're using
Surefour
a
off
hard
the high
engage
ground,
as an example of
mitigating their
space.
value and putting them on the back foot. With Canada spread out, China's dive can pick them apart and take point A. Zoning or spamming. These heroes will occupy space not with their bodies, but their weaponry.
This
Due
kind
to
of
the
fight
nature
that
of
happens at this
projectiles
point,
being
neither team has committed to stabilizing during this fight. This is what you call a chaotic or a devolved fight, in which each individual now determines their own control of resources. This is a devolved fight where every single person needs to make their own critical and individual decisions in order to try and win. Neither team called stabilize, both teams committed, and ultimates are going off, and now it comes down to the actual execution and kind of chaotic communication to try and focus your team back from individuals to a cohesive unit in the chaos of a fight.
apart and take point A. Zoning or spamming.
This is making
These
space.
heroes will
Zoning
occupy
and spamming
space
is
not with their
making
bodies,
space.
but their weaponry. Due to the nature of projectiles, being physical entities that have travel time and large hitboxes that need to be avoided, these things will occupy an area until the spammers are forced away. Whether it's
They're
rockets,
talking about making space here as
grenades,
if it has to be projectiles
arrows,
because they are slow moving,
orbs
they have
of
large
energy.
hitbox. But
Projectiles force the enemies to bob, weave,
hit
and
scan
bury much more
is
than they
a
normally
much
would in
more
order to advance.
powerful ability to
Exerting
make
pressure.
space at the
These
professional
heroes play
level
on the
because you're
principles
more
of fear
accurate.
and
Like, think of a
respect.
Widowmaker.
All of these heroes
It's
operate
much
on the idea
scarier not to
that
have
if
this
you
slow
overstep
moving
your
big orb
boundaries
moving
into
around,
their
but to have somebody who
sightlines
can
for
just
even a
instantly
moment,
one shot you in the
you
face.
have the potential
Yeah,
to be
that's pretty
seriously
scary, and that
damaged
makes a
or
lot of the
instantly
space on the map
This
untenable for
method
you to
of
be in
making
without
space is
risk
less
of
tangible
death.
than our first two concepts,
That's another
but
thing I
is
should talk
just
about,
as
risk.
effective at controlling the opponent's.
I guess, like, I'll give you the simple explanation. You can never perfectly make space. You can make it, what you're trying to do when you're making space is you're giving the opponent a 90% chance of dying in this area. You know, like a Widowmaker. No Widowmaker has a 100% crit rate or anything of that variety. But if you have like a 50% crit rate and the opponent's not using something like Defense Matrix or a shield, then they have a 50% chance of dying if you get to take a shot at them. So you can, the degree to which you control space, the degree to which you make space, is the degree of risk the opponent takes by entering that space. It's not like, this is my space, this is your space. It's like, think of it as a gradient, not as black as white. It's risks to being in certain areas or transitioning through certain areas.
Movement options and dictating what areas they can and can't occupy safely. In this clip, we see one of the reasons why the Atlanta Reign were able to hand the NYXL their first loss of the regular season. Erster's insane Junkrat play comboed with Pokepo's Orisa, both zoning and applying pressure. The NYXL know they're going to take some damage by going to the right side, but it's
This is talking about
ultimately
rotations
safer
now.
than going left and will allow them to bypass the bunker that Atlanta has set up. It's much easier to zone a room where enemies
They should
are
have started with
congested
this example,
rather
honestly.
than a larger, more open space. First, Erster traps Libero, delaying the NYXL's push and causing them to split. Meko has to use his defense matrix in an attack.
We're just barely missing the point here. Like, in the last example, when China dove Canada, that was an example of just engaging. But this is an example of actually controlling and manipulating space. You know, this is one of the reasons why Lucio is so powerful, is because, especially when you're talking about like risk, or it's not just like, it's not always that a risk of something bad will happen, like a Widowmaker. For example, in the case of Bastion spam, for example, how long you sit in an area is how long the opponent depletes your resources. So Lucio is extremely powerful because if you go through risky areas and you speed boost, you can lose fewer resources because all of you get more value out of your non-renewable resources, and you can make those transitions quickly. You can stay out of risk, out of danger. Like, you can stay out of risk for a lot longer, which means that your resources stay high and they can't catch you in transition, which is an entirely different topic. But what are they actually trying to attempt to accomplish by rotating through this right room? They're wanting to get a different area in which the opponent's location is not set up to defend from, which makes their location untenable, forces them to move, which makes space. And if the opponent has to move and they don't have a Lucio, like they're playing, are they playing Lucio? No, they're playing Zenyatta Mercy. So if they're playing Zenyatta Mercy, their rotations are going to be slow, and it's going to be a lot easier to catch them in rotation, punish them. Anytime you force the opponent to do something, the execution of it will normally, especially as you go into the lower ranks, have weaknesses to exploit. Only very, very well-drilled teams with fantastic communication can make flawless rotations. Rotations, despite being one of the simplest professional concepts, are probably one of the most difficult to both teach teams and for teams to execute at the professional level.
With Meko and Jonak lagging behind, Meko becomes demeked, and the rest of NYXL falls shortly thereafter, with help from Arisa's halt. And if you thought that play got value, here's what happened when NYXL tried the same thing on their final attack.
There's so many things I could talk about here.
Together by Pokpo.
Instead, we're gonna geek out about Junkrat.
Triple gets himself a triple kill. Rip tires be damned. He doesn't need it here.
And that brings us to our fourth and final concept: flanking.
Flanking, here we go.
To the
Attention
back line
control.
of the enemy team can divert the attention of enemy supports, preventing them from healing and forcing other members of their team to peel and help. Flanking also forces the enemy team to use resources to deal with the threat at the expense of frontline pressure, allowing your team to advance while the opponents are distracted. In this example from Season 1, Carp...
Okay. This this example is not a good one. This example is not a good one. So what you're gonna see is Carpe go in. Remember how we're talking about non-renewable resources, cooldowns, ultimates, all these things, even attention, right? Attention is you can always pay attention. The degree to which you can pay attention is based off of your own abilities, but this is why awareness is such an important factor. It's if you just have a higher awareness, you know, your renewable resource, nothing is stopping you at any point from being aware. There's no blinds or anything in the game of Overwatch. Please don't get any ideas, Jeff. So yeah, what happens here is that they've and that's another thing. Scouting is another control of resources, like information. That's another resource. Why flanking and hiding? You get it. I don't have to explain it. So basically what happens here is that Carpe right now, if you see he has 2 blinks, he's gonna get his third. He has his ultimate and he has his cooldowns, but there's also different degrees of cooldowns. Now, as you get shorter and shorter cooldowns, like blinks, 3-second regeneration, those are pretty renewable resources, but you don't always have them when you need them. But recall is a long one. So if you use recall, you don't have that resource for a significant period of time. And if you use that resource and you don't get any value out of it, then you have fewer options and the opponent can recontest you. So look at this example.
Carpe
here.
is locked and loaded with a pulse bomb and blinks forward to try
Uses
and
3
carry
blinks.
hook.
Uses
While he
pulse
doesn't
bomb.
land the pulse bomb,
Oh, he doesn't use
forces
recall.
Dallas to change their positioning.
I thought he was
And
gonna
because
recall out of
this,
there.
Hotba is able to kill effect. Coco is forced onto the low ground.
So this is an example of how you can try and use resources to gain a value. Like you try to hard commit to this. because eventually what you want ultimates to have happen is to get a kill. Carpe going in here doesn't actually create any space. And if he had, no, even without using his recall, the fact that he used all 3 blinks means that he doesn't really have the ability for him to fight anymore. He has to wait for those blinks to regenerate. If he had used his recall, he would have had to play safer until that he could actually commit with his recall up. And then he also used his pulse bomb and got no value. So let's watch this again and see where they're going with this and why we're talking about effect being killed and not about Carpe and Harry Hook.
Are distracted. In this example from Season 1, Carpe is locked and loaded with a pulse bomb and blinks forward to try and stick Harry Hook. While he doesn't land the pulse bomb, he forces Dallas to change their positioning, and because of this, Hotba is able to kill Effect.
I don't see the connection between the attempted pulse bomb and Hotba killing Effect. And like, we don't even see Hotba and Effect's positioning, do we? We don't see Hotba and Effect's positioning here. Hotba's just on the... I don't like that example. Not only is the example that's being shown with Carpe and Harry Hook not a good example, it's in fact an example of Carpe messing up.
Kills and damage is
but
great,
they're using that as a good thing to show something that happened elsewhere that they didn't actually show.
Recognizing how to make space and take space will help your game immensely.
Well, they did say make space and take space. They just didn't explain the difference or holding space.
If there's a specific topic you want us to cover on Actionpedia, feel free to let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.
Okay, that's it. Well, I hope that, I don't know, that's my opinion. I covered a lot of different topics in this video about space, and maybe I introduced some new concepts to you. But yeah, that's all I have for you today. Eventually, I've been wanting to make just an anatomy of a teamfight video that has all of these concepts condensed into one single, well-structured video. See, that's the concept, well-structured. I did this just because I was inspired having watched the video. But at some point, I'm gonna make an anatomy of a teamfight video that talks about all of the concepts of a teamfight in Overwatch, which, you know what, the best model shouldn't be restricted to whether it's professional play or ranked play. And I feel like the anatomy of a teamfight video that I am eventually going to make is going to do a great job of covering that for both people who are interested in competitive play, the professional level or semi-professional player, as well as people who just like playing ranked. So that's all I got for you today. I am going to be doing a video series releasing commentary. I've decided to take on some private coaching just for this week, and I will be releasing those videos soon as well. So we are back to making videos. We're back. We're feeling healthy and happy, and I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Have a great day.